Sometimes in football, you get a moment or a story that seems like it was taken straight out of a Hollywood script.
Manchester City are still alive here. Balotelli, Aguero! Wes Morgan, Claudio Ranieri. Lift the trophy to the skies. Leicester City are the champions of the Premier League. 5,000 to 1 shot. They have stunned the football world.
But with the recent takeover of Wrexham, the roles are being reversed. Now Hollywood is ready to call the shots in football.
It sounds like a plot from a Hollywood film. 2 movie stars taking over a football club, needing investment.
Today we ask, why are Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenny really buying Wrexham?
I think what makes it such an interesting story is essentially that 2 very high-profile, Hollywood celebrities want to buy a non-league football club in North Wales.
Well, Magee is a freelance journalist who has worked for Vice, The Mirror, and The Eye newspaper.
I think there's a sort of fundamental contrast there that makes this quite a surreal event. But happily surreal in the case of Wrexham fans, I think.
You recently wrote a piece about this Wrexham takeover for Vice. What interested you in writing this?
It is something that is specifically kind of interest to me. Like, my family have sort of Welsh heritage, and I think the backstory of Wrexham as a town and the club itself speaks a lot to sort of some of the tales that we've seen in football recently of clubs suffering very badly from poor ownership and exploitative ownership. And, that being the case, this takeover that seems like a positive story on the surface is also something worth, I guess, diving a little bit deeper into, speaking to fans about and trying to canvass people, in terms of what they actually feel about it, including people within the club. It was also something that ties into things that I'm interested in generally, like fan ownership, custodianship of football clubs, the sort of people we want to own our football clubs and allow to own our football clubs, and why that is. So, yeah, there are a lot of different angles that interested me.
Before we get to the actual takeover, I think it's important to kind of look at some of the people involved. We have Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenny, the 2 celebrities, and we also have obviously Wrexham Football Club. Let's start with Reynolds and McElhenny. For those that don't know who they are, who are they?
So I think Ryan Reynolds is probably most famous for playing Deadpool.
We've already had Black Panther. Pretty soon there'll be Ant-Man and the Wasp and Aquaman and Venom. I mean, at what point will audiences say, enough with the superheroes?
Is it Deadpool 2? I bet it's Deadpool 2.
Although anyone who's sort of more accustomed with his filmography might remember his role in Blade Trinity and Detective Pikachu. But yeah, Deadpool's probably his most acclaimed role. So he's, a pretty high-profile Canadian actor in Hollywood, while Rob McElhenney is probably best known as Mac from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is a sort of long-running American TV show about a fairly morally degenerate group of friends.
As someone who grew up on both of them, they're both very, very funny actors and definitely 2 well-known figures, at least in American cinema and television. So we have those guys on one side, and then on the other side, we have the town of Wrexham and Wrexham Football Club. Let's look at the town first. For those of us who don't know, like myself, where is it? And, kind of what defines the town?
So Wrexham is in North Wales, which is kind of interesting in itself. Speaking to Wrexham fans, a few of them were giving me the sort of socio-economic background of the town and saying that, Wales is in some ways quite like England or Britain generally, in that most of the sort of economic hubs of the country are focused in the south, not in the north. And so Wrexham is an economic hub and an important town in North Wales. It's a post-industrial town. It used to be a hub of sort of coal mining and steel manufacturing, and those industries were very important to its economy. Like the rest of Britain, they sort of went into decline or managed decline in the 70s and 80s. And yeah, I think Wrexham is probably like a lot of other post-industrial parts of Britain, or all of them really, has kind of had to struggle with the after effects of that. But likewise is still a kind of hub in North Wales, and as a football club probably has quite a big catchment area in theory.
What about the football club? Let's talk a little bit about them. What are they most known for?
Well, I mean, Wrexham were sort of historically an established football league club. They were quite famous for their FA Cup giant killings. They knocked out Arsenal in the early 90s in one of Arsenal's it's considered by Arsenal fans to be one of their worst results ever. But, I think Wrexham fans remember it as a historic night and a great night.
Dixon just hit long. And there's the whistle. Wrexham have achieved a really famous FA Cup victory.
Yeah, they have mainly competed in the lower divisions, really, of the Football League. But then in 2008, they were relegated to the Conference. In other words, the fifth tier, the highest tier of non-league, now called the National League. And they've been there ever since. So I think they're a club that's probably historically below where they feel they should be, and at a sort of historical low in terms of league position, at least, if not in terms of the kind of general health of the club.
Now, that's a little background on the club, but not on their ownership. They have a history of, maybe poor ownership. Can you talk a little bit about kind of their ownership of the club? And, we know it's a fan-owned club, or it has been recently. Can you give us some background on them?
I think the real problems for Wrexham started in the early noughties, and they suffered from very exploitative ownership, I think, where essentially Wrexham fans described their owners at the time as asset strippers, and I think that was a view that was received fairly sympathetically by most other fans and in the press as well. I think the main sort of controversy at the time was that it appeared that the racecourse ground, which is their sort of historic ground, their owners were essentially attempting to strip that away from the club and sell it or redevelop it in terms of using it for property purposes. And Wrexham fans fought that very hard, protested against that, used all means really that were possible to them to stop that from happening. And although that they did eventually manage to sort of stop the absolute worst from happening, I think the club continued to suffer from sort of financial issues and struggles. And then, it was in 2011, I think, that the Supporters Trust managed to take the club over. And since then, although the club hasn't had the success on the pitch that it might like, and, I think fan ownership as a model is not sort of universally loved by Wrexham fans necessarily, but they certainly turned their sort of financial situation around. And I think the club now, as it goes into this next takeover, is in a very good place financially compared to where it was then. So I think fan ownership has been probably a case of good custodianship in terms of the running of the club, while not necessarily coinciding with the best league results or the best sort of performances.
So we have this old historic club in North Wales struggling in the fifth tier of English football. How is it that we get to the point where two Hollywood celebrities are even considering taking over this club?
There are reasons that Wrexham as a fan-owned club would be an attractive proposition for people looking to invest in football that might not be immediately obvious. I think going back to the sort of good financial custodianship of fan ownership, that's an important aspect in that the club, as I understand it, sort of debt-free, has money in the bank, despite, the coronavirus crisis and the impact that's had on everybody's finances. The takeover, or any attempted takeover wouldn't require a huge amount of capital going to another private interest or benefactor. but instead could be pledged as investment, which obviously, again, makes it a very attractive proposition. And so I think from everything that I've been told, Rob McElhenny and Ryan Reynolds did a huge amount of research, and they clearly, with help from their advisors, will have identified Wrexham as an interesting club. And I think they were sort of advised and helped by Inner Circle Sports, who are sort of a boutique sports investment bank. And I imagine it was a collaborative process by which they hit upon Wrexham. And, I think Rob McElhenny has spoken about how, as someone who sort of grew up in Philadelphia, Wrexham's identity, I suppose, as a working class town, or a blue collar town, as he called it, appealed to him and helped him to identify with the club, I think, and to sort of see some parallels with his experience growing up in America and his background.
Now, earlier this month, Reynolds and McElhenny had a presentation via Zoom with supporters to kind of make their case. What did they say in that presentation, and how did it go?
I think something interesting is that before the presentation, I've been told by a couple of fans who were part of the voting process on account of being members of the Supporters Trust, that before the presentation, they essentially sent all of those to be voting a sort of quite extensive sort of mission statement package that I think was about 30 or 40 pages long, that sort of laid out exactly what they wanted to do and what their ambitions were and their plans were, and sort of laid out the blueprint for what they wanted to do at Wrexham. So I think people went into the Zoom conference with some idea of what they were going to talk about and intended to talk about. And I think the specifics of what they spoke about are largely known to the people who are on the Zoom conference. I think that the way they appealed to fans was essentially by being the characters that they trade off. They were, by all accounts, very charming, very funny, came across as sort of very personable, and as people who were, I suppose, familiar. But likewise, they had done their research into Wrexham as a town. They'd done their research into Wrexham as a football club, and that impressed fans, really. I think they probably contributed a mix of sort of charm and actual sort of hard-edged fact and figures and stuff, which essentially convinced people that they were taking, their nascent responsibilities as new owners of the club very seriously. So certainly the impression that every fan that I've spoken to came away with was a positive one. So whatever they said, it worked.
We know that the vote passed when it came to the vote. How many people approved, how many fans approved of it? And then, how many disagreed? What was kind of the general consensus?
It was overwhelmingly in favour. I think it was around a 91% turnout and 98.6% approval. So it was, a very emphatic vote in favour of the takeover. I think there were sort of multiple reasons for that. I think, as I mentioned, people liked them. They came across well. They have made concrete sort of hard promises and guarantees that have helped to put fans' minds at rest, I think. They have promised not to rebrand or relocate or sort of franchise the club in any way, which I think for fans who have, as we've mentioned in the past, had to deal with very exploitative ownership was a relief, really, and something that helped them to, again, establish a bridge of trust. Another important reason was that with the pandemic and the financial uncertainty surrounding that, while Wrexham are in a healthy financial shape, as I've said, I think people felt that this was sort of an offer that they couldn't turn down, really, being realistic that essentially they may never get an offer like this again. Both a good financial offer, because I suppose equally important is the fact that they've pledged to invest, I think, at least £2 million in the club, the team and the infrastructure and various different parts of the club that need a financial boost. So, there was that obviously impressed people. But likewise, I think there was a sense that this would probably be a once in a lifetime opportunity for Wrexham. While fans are sort of potentially divided on fan ownership as a model and the success that's come with it over the last 9 years, I think there are a lot of fans that have great affection for the fan ownership model and sort of appreciate owning their own football club and having a direct sort of democratic say in the decision-making process, and, you know, also avoiding the sort of exploitation that's been the ruination really of other football clubs at the same level as Wrexham. But I think that some people felt that it kind of naturally run its course. And even those who were very keen on fan ownership, I think they felt that just on the basis of realism, that they couldn't really turn this down. So I, from the people I'd spoken to, some had voted very enthusiastically to, I suppose, relinquish fan ownership. Others had voted with a sort of heavy heart to do that. But the sort of uniting theme or trend was that everyone that I spoke to had voted yes to the takeover. So, yeah.
Even though they are getting rid of the, fan ownership model, I understand that they will continue to have a presence on an honorary board. Can you kind of explain that?
I don't actually know the sort of full details of how that will work. I think one thing that's really important as well is that the racecourse ground is going to remain in community ownership. They have a 99-year lease on the ground itself. And again, for a club that in the past has had to fight off owners who have attempted to, redevelop their ground, that is a very positive sort of, I suppose, I don't know if it's a concession by Reynolds and McElhenny necessarily, but it's they've certainly done everything they can to assuage any fears fans might have about their intentions. And I think another important thing that fans said to me was that, both McElhenny and Reynolds trade off their characters and their personalities, and a big part of that is that they're sort of known as Hollywood nice guys, really. And that's an image that I think that they are keen to preserve. So essentially, if they take over Wrexham and they're seen as doing anything, untoward or that isn't really in the best interests of the football club, that could potentially damage their reputation. So I think fans felt that they sort of have skin in the game as owners, and this isn't a case of them sort of having any exploitative intentions so much as really wanting to get involved in football. I think in that sense, fans feel that it's a very different bid to a standard takeover, and in some ways quite a unique kind of occurrence in that they know exactly how McElhenny and Reynolds have made their money. It's through acting, it's through, in the case of Reynolds, investment in gin and, kind of like good business in inverted commas. And so, yeah, basically it's a pretty unique sort of takeover. And I think fans feel that they will still have quite a large stake in the club.
Not sure what to get your special someone this holiday?
Tired of them opening the same old scarf or sweater? Try Ivor Williams Trailers.
Ivor Williams Trailers has been Britain's leading trailer manufacturer for over 60 years.
Nothing says I'm thinking about you and your horse like Ivor Williams Trailer. Tilt bed, beaver tail, tipper, horse box, livestock, you name it.
So, if you're looking to really wow them this year,
and you own livestock,
visit Ivor Williams.
So we've kind of covered a lot why the fans are interested in this takeover, but I'd like to kind of look into more why McElhenny and Reynolds are interested in buying this club. You mentioned, of course, that they're in a good situation, financially, but are there any other reasons why they would be interested in buying Wrexham specifically?
Well, yeah, as I say, I think from everything people have said, it's to do with the good economic situation at the club, probably the potential they see in the club. As I mentioned, Wrexham are the only club in North Wales that are competing in the sort of English league system, which, obviously is much better funded and generally sort of much more widely supported than the Welsh league system. And I think that gives Wrexham a certain potential. And the fact that, again, that they're below where they sort of historically have tended to be in the league system means that there's potential to improve on the current situation and to sort of leave the club in a better state than they found it. There's also, there have been reports, obviously, that they intend to make a documentary about their takeover and the sort of Wrexham's subsequent story, I suppose. And I don't think that's necessarily a core motivation for buying the club so much as part of their plan to sort of market the club, and I suppose just part of their economic plan for the club. But I think that is obviously very interesting, and will probably take shape as a kind of version of All or Nothing, but much funnier and hopefully with a sort of a greater sense of self-awareness than documentaries that we've seen made about, Tottenham and Manchester City and so on and so forth.
Now, there's an extra little wrinkle to this. Alex Webb of Bloomberg kind of made the case for it, and you alluded to it earlier in terms of a documentary that is going to be made, most likely, of this takeover and of the club. Can you kind of talk about the financial aspects of a documentary and what kind of Alex Webb kind of laid out in Bloomberg?
Obviously, I think making a documentary about the club has the potential to make the club a lot of money and to transform its finances, certainly compared to the average National League club and its competitors, which, on top of the investment that McElhenny and Reynolds have promised to make themselves, should put Wrexham in a very, very healthy financial situation. It seems, well, from the early hints and so on, it seems Amazon is a likely destination for the documentary. They sort of congratulated McElhenny and Reynolds on Twitter as their takeover, and it feels like that's being primed as a destination. So obviously, with episodes likely to pull in large amounts of money for the club, essentially, it could be very lucrative for Wrexham and sort of help them establish themselves on a financial footing, which could sort of see them compete for promotion, or that's the hope anyway, I think.
Yeah, so you kind of have this like little weird, interesting thing where, they might be able to get more money and generate more money from shooting this series, that they could sell to Amazon, as you kind of mentioned. And especially if you do multiple seasons, that's generating a lot of money, which then can be kind of put into the club and improve the product on the field. And it's kind of like a compounding effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you only have to look at the success of Sunderland Till I Die as an example of, a documentary about a club, not a Premier League club, a club that's struggling in the, in the lower leagues. That has obviously been wildly sort of popular and successful. I think the hope would obviously be that any documentary about Wrexham would be a testament to their rise through the leagues and their success with McElhenny and Reynolds as owners. But obviously with McElhenny and Reynolds involved, it will have its own selling point really as something people want to watch, whether or not they are interested in National League football, maybe even English football full stop, or even football full stop. So I think, the potential for that to have a huge audience is clear. The potential for that to bring in a lot of money for the club directly is clear. And also I think as a marketing tool for Wrexham, if the intention really is to, transform Wrexham into a club that can, push for, I suppose, the higher echelons of English football. Yeah, the marketing potential is pretty huge, I think. There's a caveat to all this, I think, in that it is very difficult to get promoted from the National League. 2 teams go up every year, one, the winners of the league champions, and one team via the playoffs. So McElhenny and Reynolds might find that as owners, they come across their own difficulties and that actually it's not an easy ride getting Wrexham into the upper echelons of English football. But I think financially and from a marketing perspective, it's hard to see how a documentary, whether they have great success or not, won't be a win-win really for them and for the club.
In their mission statement, they mentioned a, quote, global appeal and their desire to, quote, expand club staff to take advantage of increased interest in Wrexham, both locally and internationally. What should we make of these comments about global appeal and, trying to appeal internationally? What do you make of those?
I think, as always, with any sort of takeover, but yeah, certainly when people make grand mission statements like that, it is obviously necessary to take that with a pinch of salt and a degree of scepticism. Wrexham, as I say, is an important hub in North Wales. It will be interesting to see whether they are able to market Wrexham globally. I think Wrexham fans probably know that. They probably realise that while that is an admirable statement, marketing Wrexham globally is not necessarily the core sort of focus of the project and isn't necessarily an ambition that's going to be fulfilled. But whether or not that they do manage to sort of market Wrexham globally, I think from what I've heard speaking to fans, people have sort of said that, the most important thing is when Wrexham as a football club is doing well, Wrexham the town does well. You know, the local economy is boosted. People, you know, are happy. People get to support a successful football club. You know, the whole town gets involved, and it is a real football town, and they're sort of hugely invested in the club, which, you know, is shown, I think, from the fact that they still draw pretty large crowds despite not being at the pinnacle of their success whatsoever. And so whether or not making Wrexham a global hotspot is, you know, a reality, or whether that's, you know, an ambition that can be fulfilled, I think the important thing for Wrexham fans is that the club benefits from this. The club is in a better state than it is currently, and that the town benefits, and locally that they see the benefits of it. I know some of the fans who voted for the takeover did so sort of primarily because they thought it would bring, you know, a huge boost to the town's kind of local economy.
Will Magee is a freelance journalist who has worked for Vice, The Mirror, and the I newspaper. For more information about Wrexham's takeover, I recommend his recent article for Vice. The music for this episode was provided under the Creative Commons license by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find more information about those songs in the episode show notes. This episode was produced by myself and John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening to Football Today. And before you go, if you're a fan and would like to support us, why not sign up to our Patreon page, where you'll get access to full interviews, bonus episodes, and extra content. And if you can't spare the cash, please tell a friend instead. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.